On September 2nd, I wrote to this Council urging concerted efforts to prevent further escalation of the crisis in northern Rakhine State. I'm encouraged that the Council has discussed the situation 4 times in less than a month. The reality on the ground demands action, swift action, to protect people, alleviate suffering, prevent further instability, address the root causes of the situation, and forge, at long last, a durable solution. The following briefing is based on our reporting from the ground and is our best sense of what has happened, what is still happening, and what needs to be done. Mr. President, the current crisis has steadily deteriorated since the August 25 attacks by the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army on the Myanmar security forces. I repeat my condemnation of those attacks today. Since then, the situation has spiraled into the world's fastest developing refugee emergency and a humanitarian and human rights nightmare. I continue to call on the Myanmar authorities to take 3 immediate steps. First, to end the military operations. Second, to allow unfettered access for humanitarian support. And third, to ensure the safe, voluntary, dignified and sustainable return of the refugees to their areas of origin. Let me now review what we know about the military operations that have taken place since August the 25th. While there have been competing narratives in a highly complex environment, certain elements are clear. At least 500,000 civilians have fled their homes and sought safety in Bangladesh. The authorities have claimed that security operations ended on September the 5th, following major displacement in northern Rakhine, where Rohingyas were the majority. However, displacement appears to have continued, with reports of the burning of Muslim villages, as well as looting and acts of intimidation. Myanmar authorities themselves have indicated that at least 176 of 471 Muslim villages in northern Rakhine have been totally abandoned. The violence in Rakhine, whether by the military or radical elements within communities, must end. The Myanmar authorities must fulfill their fundamental obligation of ensuring the safety and security of all communities and upholding the rule of law without discrimination. The Myanmar authorities have said repeatedly in the past few days that it was not the time for unhindered access to resume. Given the enormous needs, this position is deeply regrettable. The United Nations and its partners should be allowed to reach the affected areas without delay. And I'd also like to address the issue of safe return of refugees to their places of origin. I ask members of the Security Council to join me in urging that all those who have fled to Bangladesh be able to exercise their right to a safe, voluntary, dignified and sustainable return to their homes. Myanmar authorities have committed to use the framework established in the 93 joint statement of the foreign ministers of Bangladesh and Myanmar to facilitate these returns. While that may be a useful starting point, it is not sufficient in the present circumstances. Notably, the framework does not refer to resolving the root cause of displacement, and moreover, it requires documents that the fleeing Rohingya may not be able to provide. In this highly complex environment, the Myanmar authorities must work to diffuse tensions and uphold and protect the rights of all communities, including the respect for property rights. We should not be surprised if decades of discrimination and double standards in treatment of the Rohingya create openings for radicalization. In moving forward, we need an effective partnership with Myanmar authorities, especially the military. All involved should refrain from any actions that could exacerbate the precarious situation on the ground. The Muslims of Rakhine State should be granted nationality. The present Myanmar citizenship legislation only allows it partially. We encourage Myanmar to revise it in line with international standards. In the interim, an effective verification exercise, as previously foreseen, should allow those entitled to be granted citizenship according to the present laws. All others must be able to obtain a legal status that allows them to lead a normal life, including freedom of movement and access to labor markets, education, and health services. The United Nations will remain a close partner to Myanmar to address these urgent issues. We have no agenda, other than help Myanmar advance the well-being of all the country's people. We have no interest other than to see all communities enjoying peace, security, prosperity, and mutual respect. And we are committing to nothing less than easing the heartbreaking suffering of so many vulnerable people while forging a lasting solution that affirms shared values, promotes mutual respect, and upholds human dignity.
This is a human tragedy and an acute humanitarian crisis that has exploded at an almost unprecedented speed. For it is the Burmese military who bear the primary responsibility for resolving this crisis. There is a way out. First, the Burmese military under Commander-in-Chief Min Aung Hlaing must immediately stop the violence in Rakhine State and ensure the protection of all civilians, including the Rohingya. Second, the Burmese authorities need to grant UN agencies and their partners full and unhindered humanitarian access to Rakhine. We welcome the government's cooperation with humanitarian agencies such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, and we welcome the Red Cross's efforts to respond to the crisis. But the humanitarian needs inside Rakhine vastly exceed the Red Cross's capacity. Only UN agencies and their partners can provide urgent life-saving assistance at the scale required. And we believe the authorities should calm anti-United Nations rhetoric and stop it immediately in state media outlets. Third, Burma should work with Bangladesh to establish a safe, voluntary, and sustainable way for those who have fled Rakhine to return to their homes. We welcome the civilian government's commitment to the right of return, but previous arrangements have been inadequate. There needs to be a process which allows those who have fled to register themselves as refugees. It needs to be a process which acknowledges that many fled without documents or never had them in the first place. A process which allows people to return to their homes and places of origin safely, voluntarily, and sustainably. Fourth, the recommendations of the Annan Commission on Rakhine State must be implemented swiftly and in full. We welcome the Burmese authorities' public commitment to this and the establishment of a ministerial implementation committee. It is essential that we now see progress, particularly on citizenship. And fifth, we urge the Burmese authorities to cooperate with the UN fact-finding mission established by the Human Rights Council. If the Burmese authorities have any doubt about what is happening, this is how reports can be independently verified and those responsible held to account. This crisis now casts a deep shadow over Burma's international reputation, on its leaders and its military. The Burmese authorities must now take the decisions that will decide their place in history. They can choose to end the violence and protect civilians and defend human rights. They can choose to allow humanitarian access, including by the United Nations. They can work with Bangladesh on the return of refugees, and they can address the long-term issues raised by the Annan Commission. But should they fail to do so, they will find themselves on the wrong side of history, and this Council must be ready to take further action. Thank you, Mr. President.
For over 4 weeks, the world has endured images from Burma we should never have to see. Much more importantly, we have seen images of acts no person should ever have to endure. We have tried to engage the Burmese military at the highest levels. We've supported regional efforts to de-escalate the violence and expand humanitarian access. Now, hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees remain in Bangladesh in fear of returning to their homes. And Burmese leaders must come to terms with the facts on the ground. We cannot be afraid to call the actions of the Burmese authorities what they appear to be: a brutal, sustained campaign to cleanse the country of an ethnic minority. And it should shame senior Burmese leaders who have sacrificed so much for an open, democratic Burma. The Burmese government claims it is battling terrorists. If this is true, let them allow media and humanitarian access to back up their claim. And any country that is currently providing weapons to the Burmese military should suspend these activities until sufficient accountability measures are in place. What is perhaps most frustrating about this conflict is how we should have seen it coming. The different communities in the Rakhine State have had periods of peaceful coexistence, but they have also seen periods of extreme violence. And between these outbursts, the Rohingya have suffered discrimination and been denied basic rights as citizens of Burma.
As Minister Margot Wallström said in the General Assembly last week, the situation in Myanmar is a haunting example of where the seeds of conflict have gone unresolved with tragic consequences. Once again, we see the human cost of not investing enough in prevention. The crisis in Rakhine State is complex and it's multidimensional. It requires a comprehensive and sustained response with support from the international community. At the same time, in light of the immediate needs of those displaced inside and outside of the country, a number of issues now need to be addressed urgently. We call on Myanmar to ensure the immediate suspension of all military and security operations. All violence must end. The government has the responsibility to ensure the safety and security of all communities without discrimination. Secondly, we urge the government to grant immediate, full, safe and unhindered humanitarian access to the United Nations and its partners to all areas so that they can reach those in urgent need of life-saving assistance.
The terrible facts are there in front of us, as was recalled by President Macron when he spoke at the tribune of the General Assembly. Ethnic cleansing is currently underway in the west of Burma. And in this regard, our immediate efforts have to concentrate on the three things. First of all, putting an end to violence. We call upon all of the parties to immediately stop perpetrating violence against civilian population. We are also asking the Burmese security forces to ensure, as is their duty, their protection to all without discrimination. The Burmese authorities also have to put an end to what is being done by the self-proclaimed groups who go after the Rohingya people. Second priority, and it cannot be separated from the first, is restoring an access to humanitarian access swiftly and in unimpeded fashion to humanitarian actors. ICRC and the Burmese Red Cross are already mobilized. They've already delivered substantial assistance, but it's insufficient given the scale of the need. It is urgent to provide the United Nations agencies with access, as well as the World Food Programme, UNICEF, and major non-governmental organizations, such as, for example, Médecins Sans Frontières. They are in a position to intervene in a way which is neutral, independent, and impartial, and provide emergency assistance. Denying the rights to Rohingya, something that's been happening for decades, has engendered a radicalization of a minority amongst them. But the civilian population, even so, should not have to pay the price for the violence committed by an extremist group.
We call for the restoration of security in a manner consistent with the rule of law and with full respect for human rights, while ensuring transparency throughout the efforts. We also stress the importance of continuous efforts to secure humanitarian access for all affected communities. What is important is prompt action. We take note of the announcement to establish the implementation committee of Rakhine Advisory Commission. Japan will support efforts by the government of Myanmar to address the human rights and humanitarian conditions on the ground.
China condemns the recent violent attacks in Myanmar's Rakhine State and supports Myanmar's effort to keep its domestic situation stable. We sincerely hope order will prevail again as soon as possible, so no more harm will come to the innocent civilians, and social stability, unity among ethnic groups, and economic development in Myanmar will be sustained. The question of Rakhine State is rooted in a nexus of complex historical, ethnic, and religious factors. Many of the differences and antagonisms have been building up over a long time. There is no quick fix. A viable solution will be one that goes in tandem with the peace and reconciliation process in Myanmar. China has taken note of a series of measures taken by the government of Myanmar to ease the situation in Rakhine State and keep it stable. This is conducive to the search for a long-term solution to this issue. It behooves the international community to view the difficulties and challenges confronting the government of Myanmar through objective optics, exercise patience, and provide support and help. China, as a friendly neighbor to both Myanmar and Bangladesh, has been actively engaging with both countries to influence them positively and encourage them to address the issue through dialogue and consultation. China has provided and will continue to provide necessary assistance for accommodating the displaced people. As we speak, the situation on the ground is beginning to move towards stability. All parties should work constructively to help reinforce this momentum, de-escalate the situation there, and alleviate the humanitarian conditions step by step. China stands ready to work with all parties concerned to contribute constructively to the restoration of order and the achievement of peace and stability in Rakhine State.
We share the concern about the serious worsening of the situation in the region, which was provoked first and foremost by the fighters from the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. We resolutely condemn their armed attempts aimed at undermining the efforts to stabilize the situation in the Rakhine State. We are concerned by the mass fleeing of the Muslims, Buddhist, and Hindu refugees and the humanitarian crisis which arose. We empathize with people who found themselves in such a difficult situation in whose rights ended up being violated. At the same time, the information we are receiving tells us that the situation in the Rakhine State is far from being unequivocal. And in the recent days, we've received illustration of the fact that the ARSA, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, were involved with killing of the civilians. What was also found were caches of improvised explosive devices. There is information that the extremists forced members of the Hindu community in border villages to leave their homes and to migrate to the neighboring Bangladesh together with the Muslims. We would like to underscore the excessive pressure on Naypyidaw in the current circumstances could only aggravate the situation in the country and around it. We continue holding our position that there is no alternative to resolving the existing problems in the Rakhine State, that they can all be resolved using political means through a dialogue between representatives of all nationalities and faiths. We call upon the parties involved and the outside players to show restraint and to be objective in the assessment of the events. We need to be very careful when we wield such notions as genocide and ethnic cleansing. We need to focus on practical assistance to the government of Myanmar and Bangladesh as we look for a solution to this difficult and comprehensive issue in the spirit of equality and mutual respect. We need to stop any kind of violence from any side and the rhetoric which fuels it. We cannot allow further radicalization in the region. This can be used by terrorists and extremists. They are already trying to put down roots in Southeast Asia. We need to strive for a constructive involvement of the government and representatives of all nationalities and confessions in the resolution of this long-standing and complicated crisis. And we should not forget about the immediate goals of socio-economic development of the Rakhine State.